Good morning, it's 8:09. Now, when it comes to fire safety, you'd think businesses and landlords would be on the ball, getting all the relevant precautions in place. But figures suggest half of Northamptonshire companies and houses of multiple occupancy, that's houses with people living there who are not related to one another, living in bedsits or accommodation that's been converted to flats, maybe. Those premises inspected by the fire service in the last year, half of them in Northamptonshire failed their safety audits. Now, firms are being warned not to put off the assessments because that could put lives at risk. And later in the programme, we'll speak to Northamptonshire Fire Service. But for now, I'm joined by Gregory, who is Managing Director of the Northampton-based firm Safety Management UK. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Stuart.
So why are we talking about so many premises where the fire inspections have effectively failed, and what sort of things may they have failed on?
Right then, well, the failures they'll vary greatly, although having said that, there's generally a trend on the items that fail. So the failures don't always have to be significant either, and when we talk about significant, it's something that's particularly major. With the numbers that Northamptonshire have produced, the far more significant numbers are the 39 enforcement notices and the 19 prohibition notices. So the remainder of the 539 are what we would call minor contraventions.
For example, Brian?
Right, minor contraventions would be something like, for example, if a fire door isn't fitting correctly into its rebate. So if the fire door doesn't fit correctly, whilst that may appear relatively minor at this moment in time, the fire door is there to stop the travel of fire in the event of fire. And if it's not closed properly, then that won't stop the flow of fire, so fire will continue through the building.
And people, you do go round, don't you, and you see fire doors propped open by all manner of things, from a cup or a glass that's heavy enough to stop it, or a paperweight or something. And the point of a fire door is it should be closed unless somebody's walking through it.
Absolutely, yeah, all the time.
So if for some reason the fire door is propped open or isn't closing properly, that could be enough to fail the audit?
Yes, potentially yes. And that's something that when you speak to the fire service later on, they'll be able to define precisely why and why not they would fail an audit.
Okay, and you say that's a relatively minor thing because it's simple to fix. What are some of the more serious things that you might fail on?
For example, something that would be more serious, and you mentioned houses of multiple occupation, which is where the life risk is particularly high. Fire alarms in place. So if they've got a fire alarm in place, for example, in a converted property, but the fire alarm isn't working, so that's putting the entire property at risk.
Right, okay, and which is why we get these wretched fire alarm tests so regularly in certain buildings with a piercing noise that threatens to blow your head off, but it's important to do that.
Oh, very important to do that. Otherwise, people don't know when there's a fire, and the fire alarm is there to help people know that they've got to escape the building within several minutes. If the fire alarm doesn't work, people sit blissfully watching Coronation Street, not aware there's a problem downstairs.
Sure. Now, at your company, Safety Management UK, you carry out the sort of checks we're talking about independently of the fire service, do you?
No. We're slightly different. We carry out fire risk assessments. So we look at the property for example, landlords of HMOs, and we tell them what's wrong, and we also tell them how to put it right. Whereas the audits that take place, that the fire service, the enforcement authority undertake, what they do is they actually look at the fire risk assessment and they look at the building itself as well.
Right, so you're there really to advise companies on what they can do to make sure they're complying with the rules?
Correct, yeah, we're there to help them.
And on the face of it, Brian, it would appear to be pretty shocking that over half of the premises in Northamptonshire have failed. Does that surprise you?
It is slightly higher than the national average. The national average is around about 40% of assessments that have failed. But yes, it does show that people still need assistance, or they need to either do more homework or they need professional assistance in dealing with the fire safety.
Are we talking about a problem here of affording this? Is money the issue? Is it expensive to put the safety precautions in place?
I think the world's struggling with money these days, Stuart, isn't it? It's a case of prioritising the money they've got. I'm not in a position to speak for landlords and business owners, etc., what it is. But it would be fair to assume that the money is probably a significant factor, and it should be prioritised in different places.
Well, of course, the cost of a fire, in all sorts of terms, both financially and in human terms, could be far more.
Oh, it could be vast, and when you start talking in human terms, it's not worth contemplating, is it?
Indeed so. And when you talk to people who've failed one of these audits and they're looking to you for advice. Are they trying to save money, to cut corners?
At the point where they failed the advice, obviously they've got the enforcing authority in short on the back then. So what they're trying to do is get the enforcing authority off the back. So it tends to be that they'll do what they need to do. However, part of our job is not to spend their money freely. It's to help them find the most cost-effective solutions whilst maintaining safety within their buildings and their businesses.
And presumably some buildings are more difficult than others. I mean, if you are looking at a property with multi-occupation, very often they can be big old houses that have been converted, as I said earlier on, into bedsits or flats. And I guess the very age of the property can present issues.
Yes, it does. And in properties like that, we do stress that there's a great need to take a reasonable measure of safety, certainly with regards to fire, because, as you say, there's no compartmentation. We can't guarantee that we can hold the fire in any one single unit, in any one single flat. So there needs to be an alarm system in place, and the evacuation system needs to be effective as well, so everybody knows what to do when they hear the alarm.
Sure, and at the end of the day, are we talking about, in your view, a major issue here that needs to be addressed by the people who are running and operating these buildings?
It's perhaps not major yet, although when you get the fire service on later on, they'll tell you how serious they see it, because they're the ones that are picking up the problems. They don't actually tell us what problems they're picking up. So they may say it's major, but it's certainly something that needs to hit everybody's awareness on a regular basis rather than potentially being major yet.
Brian, very grateful for your time this morning. Thank you for joining us on the programme.
Thanks a lot, Stuart.
Brian Gregory, Managing Director of the Northampton-based firm Safety Management UK.